Listen, right now you could be only a few clicks away from experiencing something amazing, something that has changed thousands of lives all over the world. I'm talking about a high consciousness field similar to those at pilgrimage sites and sacred places. It's where people go to heal, to connect, and to become the best possible version of themselves. With FLFE, you can bring such a high consciousness field into your home right now. It's a spiritual quantum technology based on the work of Nikola Tesla. Better sleep, more energy, greater well-being, improved finances, electrosmog mitigation. These are only some of the things people on the FLFE service are experiencing. Try it now for 15 days completely free of charge, no credit card needed. Just click on a link down below to start your free, no strings attached FLFE trial right now. Hey, Inspire Tribe, my fellow freedom lovers. John Nolan here. Thank you so much for tuning in. It is Wednesday, June 19th, 2024. We're healthy, we're wealthy, we're whole, we're free. That is the mantra of the Inspired live stream. Welcome, everybody. Welcome, Anna, in the live chat. Good to see you, my friend. Merlin is here. Jay Frog is here. Angela is here. Vicky, good to see you, my friend. Then we have Sharon, of course. Sharon is on a streak. That's wonderful. Carla, Christian, Claudia, Girl Sees Dragons. Good to see you, my friend. Cypher9, Dub J, Gracious Love, Deb, Angela already mentioned. Let me see up there. Empath Lady. Oh, so good to see you all. Thank you for being here. It's always an honor to have you. We're on X, on Rumble, and on YouTube. And today we're talking about probably the subject that has... Who's here? Charlotte? Oh, Charlotte. Charlotte, thank you so much for your contribution. What a great honor to have your support like this. Thank you. So, friends, we want to talk about freedom, and this has been, for Christine and I, the first big movement that we were a part of and started was called Welcome to Freedom. And as I wrote a song with another guy together. We wrote a song called Welcome to Freedom, and we really reached a lot of people. Not just online, but doing seminars and talks and shows and whatnot. But freedom is not a show. Freedom is not a movement. Freedom is not some abstract idea. But freedom is also not as oversimplified as it has been over the last decades and centuries. And the reason why I'm inspired to talk about it is because I've literally dedicated, and we have dedicated our lives to not just living freedom, but to educate ourselves and others on it, to show on all level what it means. It isn't just, hey, I can do whatever I want and I can have guns. And that's, it's been so bottled up and marketed as such a simple concept. It's not just waving a flag. Or freedom is something that actually people have a hard time defining. So I was searching over the years. I was searching for just definitions that others have come up, philosophers have come up in the past, world leaders have come up in the past. And it's interesting what has remained, what dictionaries are saying, what traditions are saying about it, what maybe some native cultures are saying about it. And when we look further back, we think of freedom as something that has only recently entered, society in the political sphere. And of course, looking at the last few centuries, this is true. If you look at Europe, for example, hundreds and hundreds of years back, there's no tradition of freedom. There's more or less liberty in some systems, but usually less. And even today, today everybody has moved away from the definitions of being a monarchy, being a republic, everything's a democracy now, right? Mob rule. The 51% dictate to everyone else what they can and cannot do. Democracy is a very anti-freedom concept, by the way. At least if you study it deeply, if you understand what it really does. But why? Why is it important? Most people on this journey, when you really talk to them about what freedom really means, they get triggered, they get angry, they get defensive, and ultimately, they will defend their literal enslavement over the possibility of experiencing freedom. In the COVID era, in the COVID years, I've seen this so often. When I had conversations with people from Europe, and I don't want to generalize because there's great freedom lovers, fighters in Europe. Thank you so much, Mike. In all countries, no doubt about it. I'm talking about the average or the general feeling or perspective on this. And the average perspective on this is, listen, if I can get safety, if I can get comfort, if I can get my needs taken care of, well, I mean, freedom. What is freedom? I can still go out. I can still shop now. Not that I have my certificates. People are they're very complacent, acquiescent, because over generations and generations and generations, they have been taught to live in a dependent way, depending on a system, depending on a government, depending on structures around them that can fulfill their needs to a certain degree. And hence, it is okay to give up what they might consider to be freedom. So, what I have discovered, and we have discovered really, is that talking about freedom isn't nearly as inspiring, if you believe it or not, to people as talking about truth. Now, here's the kicker: there is no freedom without truth. Truth is the foundation of freedom, because everything that isn't truth is an illusion and, by definition, a form of enslavement. Yeah, it's not necessarily the kind of enslavement where you're in chains and you're beaten to work and you're abused in that way. But enslavement comes in many forms. And as a matter of fact, the most hopeless enslavement is when you believe you're free, when you can't see the chains. When you can see the chains, at least it's clear. At least you know. But when you don't know because you've been programmed to think that what you are experiencing is freedom, that's when it gets troublesome. That's why people defend it so vehemently. So truth and discovering, seeking, talking about it, implementing it, embodying it, showing it has become more important because it is the fundamental foundation of freedom. Without it, there is none. So let's look a little bit at how we could find our way into freedom. What I have learned and what we have learned since we have dedicated our life to this is that living in freedom is the most responsible way to live. And that is exactly what triggers people. Okay, let's look at this a little bit deeper here. What is freedom? So there are multiple definitions. Let's look at what the American Heritage Dictionary says. It's the condition of not being in prison or captivity. Wow, that bar is low. The condition of being free of restraints, especially the ability to act without control or interference by another or by circumstance. Thank you, Slick. I really appreciate it. Thank you. The condition of not being controlled by another nation or political power, also political independence. Now, what stood out to me in this American Heritage Dictionary definition is that freedom basically is only defined as the absence of something else. It doesn't have an inherent definition in and of itself, a positive definition. It only has negative definitions, meaning freedom is when you're not this or when you're not that. Which, of course, it's idiotic actually to look at any definition to say, oh, freedom is simply the absence of this. Yeah, peace is the absence of war. Okay, but peace is not the the highest desirable state. Actually, it's harmony, right? So peace is only the absence of war. So this is how the American Heritage Dictionary defines it. Let's look a little further. Let's go and say what Merriam-Webster says. The absence of necessity, coercion, or constraint in choice or action. The liberation from slavery or restraint or from the power of another. The quality or state of being exempt or released, usually from something onerous. Now, this is interesting. Let's look at the last piece of that definition because it couldn't be further from the truth. Thank you, Slick. Wow, a double downer here. Thank you for both of your contributions. Really appreciate it. So, the quality or state of being exempt or released, usually from something onerous. How could that be freedom? Because you have to ask yourself, who would have the authority to exempt you or release you from something, which in and of itself points to non-freedom. Freedom in its purest form can never be allowed. It cannot be given. It cannot be granted. You can't be exempted from something and hence you're free, because the minute that an authority outside of you, let's just make one exemption, which is the creator. If the creator ever chose to cut your free will and direct you directly, okay. But other than that, who would have the authority to grant you, exempt you, or release you from something? That cannot be freedom. That at best could be liberty. Liberty, which is a more limited form of freedom within the confines of a society. So this is what Merriam-Webster says. We're going to go deeper, friends. This is what the Black's Law Dictionary, which is the standard dictionary for the justice system, for the lawyers, and so forth. Freedom is described as a state of being free. Wow, powerful. Thank you, Raymond. Really appreciate it, my friend. Liberty, self-determination, absence of restraint, the opposite of slavery, the power of acting in the character of a moral person. Now here, for the first time, we're actually looking at a more positive description of what that could mean. So the power of acting in the character of a moral person, according to the dictates of the will, without other control than that of the laws of nature and society. But again, it is limited. The laws of nature, I understand, the laws of nature inherently will interact with you. But the laws of society are a choice. The laws of society is a choice that you can make and say, I want to be a part of it or I don't want to be a part of it. But nobody tells you that. It implies the power of enjoying the social, political, and civil privileges of a community and is considered essential to personal autonomy and the functioning of a free society. This is not the definition of freedom, by the way, if you really study this long. This is more liberty. And we've talked about libertarian concepts and the necessity to define or find a framework for freedom within a society, especially if you live in closer spaces together. Some things are simply not possible in closer spaces versus in free range. So I get that part. But here's the thing, reading all of these definitions hasn't really spoken to my spirit yet whatsoever. I don't really know how to be free yet by just reading this. And when I read this 20 years ago and 25 years ago, whatever, I felt the same way. Nobody really can describe, none of these people can properly describe freedom, none of these dictionaries. And why not? Well, it would have to be experienced to be described properly, wouldn't it? So I decided to look a little deeper. Who else could have thought about the concept of freedom and why? Let's look at the Lakota traditions. The Lakota. The Lakota view of freedom is holistic and relational, emphasizing harmony with the natural world, spiritual practices, community well-being, personal autonomy, respect, and cultural preservation. Now, that is starting to broaden the picture here. Unlike many Western notions of freedom that focus on individual rights and liberties, Lakota freedom is inherently tied to the collective and the environment, highlighting a deep sense of responsibility and interconnectedness. So here is why we have to take a moment and appreciate why the Lakota defined freedom vastly different than our forefathers. No matter if you're talking about the American ones or the European ones, which they're all European ones, um, the reason being that the Lakota in their lifestyle did not experience individual suppression or oppression on a systemic level. That was not part of their lives. So to utterly define and go out of their way to define individual freedom wasn't necessary because oppression was not part of their system. However, in most other places of the world, especially in Western traditions, oppression has been an essential part of all political systems. So that's why the founding fathers here in America emphasized individual liberty, freedom, self determination above all. We can't fault them for this. We can't fault them because they were part of systems that simply used force and violence if somebody tried to be free or express themselves freely. So we simply have a different perspective that needs to be appreciated. We also need to understand that the founding fathers um, sat with the Iroquois nations, with the Six Nations. They studied their Confederacy Constitution over many years and have borrowed to a certain extent from the Confederacy Constitution, but left out certain other things, which I think the closest thing I can think is they simply weren't able to comprehend the entire concept because there was no lived memory. In their tradition, there was no lived memory. They were used to monarchy. And basically the colonization of America, yes, it provided an unusual amount of freedom to them simply because there was no structure in place that could restrict them greatly. But on the other hand, it was also constantly interrupted by conflict and warfare. So we have to understand that. But I think that if we truly want to grasp freedom on a greater level, we need to look at those traditions who have maybe lived in freedom and lived that concept more than anyone else for longer periods of times. Then there is something that is called the Tao Te Ching, which is the foundational guide, if you will, of Taoism. Right? It was nobody really knows exactly when it started. We're talking, of course, thousands of years, and nobody knows if it was truly just one person, Lao Tzu, or if this was a collection of teachers. But the Tao Te Ching has been a instrumental spiritual, cultural, and if you will, life guideline, a book for many generations, and it tries to show the way of life, which inherently includes freedom. So let's look at the concept of freedom in the Tao Te Ching according to Lao Tzu. So you have Wu Wei, non-action or effortless action. Wu Wei refers to the concept of taking action in alignment with the natural flow of the Tao. I'll get into what the Tao is. Without force or struggle, it is about acting in a way that is spontaneous and effortless, in harmony with the nature of things. So the Tao is often loosely translated as the way, maybe the way of life, if you will. but at the same time, there's a underlying truth. The Tao that can be named is not the Tao. So the way that can be named, the God that can be named is not the God. And you could interpret this with the Tao is everything. It is not one thing. It can't be named or defined. Okay. So what are the key aspects of this Wu Wei concept is freedom is found in going with the flow of life rather than against it, allowing actions to arise naturally and without coercion. Now, this is a much deeper way to look at this. Freedom is found in going with the flow of life rather than against it. That's a very powerful thing to say. What else does the Tao say about freedom? Naturalness, Ziran, means self-so or naturalness. It denotes the quality of being natural, spontaneous, and authentic without artificial interference. Natural, spontaneous, and authentic. These are qualities that we hold in the highest regard. We express them every day here. The key aspects here are true freedom is living in accordance with one's true nature and the natural order of the universe, free from artificial constraints and societal pressures. So we see that even in this highly philosophical, spiritual definition, there is still the mentioning of the negative, of the opposite of what freedom is, which I think has a place in it, right? And it shows that this fight, this duality between freedom and oppression, freedom and slavery, this yin and yang, if you will, has been going on almost since time immemorial. And there was a desire and an intention, even then, thousands and thousands of years ago, to define certain things and talk about them. But just looking at these definitions tells you that the inherent struggles that people had back then weren't all that different from what we have right now. Otherwise, that wouldn't have been necessary. The freest culture or the freest society is perhaps the one that doesn't have the need to constantly talk about freedom because they're living it. Hence, when you look at the native, the indigenous peoples, if they live their culture, they don't talk a lot about freedom because that's what they live. Simplicity or pu. Pu, often translated as uncarved block or simplicity, symbolizes the state of pure potential and unspoiled nature. Freedom is achieved through simplicity, humility, and embracing the unadorned essence of life. It involves letting go of excessive desires and complexities. So, why I love these definitions and explanations is because they actually point to freedom and being free, actually, as it shows that it is a verb before it becomes a noun. Freedom is first a verb and then it turns into a noun. It's not an adjective or a noun at first. It's a verb. It means that we need to practice it. We need to put it into action. And mainly we need to practice it because we haven't lived freely. And I can tell you that the first few years of us practicing freedom meant also that Christine and I would constantly remind ourselves of not just limited thinking, but limited speaking, limited action taking. And if for nothing else, simply to be aware of it, where you go, wait a minute, this is what we've been conditioned to do or think or say. So it can't be freedom. It isn't a free thought that you had or I had. It is something that we were conditioned to think and a way that we were conditioned to react in. Because we live most of our life in an unconscious way, if our unconsciousness is programmed to not think freely, well, then we're not going to react freely and act freely. And this is something that requires a lot of practice. It isn't just a decision that you make, oh, I'm going to be free. No. You literally have to begin questioning all your actions, all your habits, all your beliefs, all your words that you use, why you use them, all your truths, all the things you always say, all those things need to be questioned because we are a people that has been programmed to uh, subject ourselves to black ink on white paper. Whatever is the written word, especially if it's the law, then we tend to follow it because that's how we've been programmed. This gives us a much better way of looking at the practicality of what freedom truly means. Detachment. Detachment in the Tao Te Ching refers to the idea of being free from rigid attachments to material possessions, status, and ego. Now, these are things that, ironically, our one of the main or key elements of freedom in the American tradition is the pursuit of happiness and the right to property. So basically, in a feudal system in Europe, people could not own or only conditionally own, or only if they were part of certain bloodlines own, versus when they came here and they, for the first time, could truly own land, create business, enterprise, right? So business, enterprise, attachments to material possessions are fully a freedom tradition in the American way. It is so far that most people equate freedom with the ability to possess things. So while in and of itself, I do not speak out against possession or a true free capitalism or capitalistic market, I don't, but I contest the idea that that is what freedom is. This is the overarching principle is capitalism equals freedom in America, when the practical ways that capitalism is lived couldn't be further removed from freedom. Really, it's a very controlled system. So what I'm saying is we can't equate freedom to just the way that we do business with each other. There's way more to that. And detachment for true spiritual inner freedom is a key element to detach not only from things, but ultimately also from the uh, interdependentness or interdependence of people for everything. We're so interdependent, and to a certain degree, community is so important and family is so important, but to not be even able to fulfill your own needs because we're not able anymore, we don't know how to anymore, that can't be freedom. That can't be freedom. So freedom involves a state of mind where one is not bound by desires, ambitions, or external validations, thus allowing for inner peace and contentment. Here are a few verses from the Tao Te Ching that express that beautifully. Verse 8 says, "The highest good is like water. Water gives life to the 10,000 things and does not strive. It flows in places men reject, and so is like the Tao." It's often been said, be like the water. The interpretation is just as water flows naturally and effortlessly, true freedom involves living in harmony with the Tao, allowing oneself to be flexible and adaptable, in harmony with the way of life, in harmony with the way of the Creator. Verse 48, in the pursuit of learning, every day something is acquired. In the pursuit of the Tao, every day something is dropped. Less and less is done until non-action is achieved. When nothing is done, nothing is left undone. That is the great paradox that so many people get triggered by of the Tao. Do nothing and leave nothing undone. Interpretation. Freedom comes from shedding unnecessary desires and actions, embracing simplicity, and allowing things to unfold naturally. Verse 57. Now, this is going to speak to a lot of you. The more laws and restrictions there are, the poorer people become. The sharper men's weapons, the more trouble in the land. The more ingenious and clever people are, the more strange things happen. The more rules and regulations, the more thieves and robbers. Now, listen, if this doesn't describe our society down to a T from a book that was written thousands and thousands of years ago, which tells us that this is not the first time we're in a situation that we're in, that very strange things are happening. We have more laws, more regulations, more rules, yet people become poorer. We have the best weapons, yet there's more trouble than ever. Thank you, Leslie. Really appreciate it. Thank you. The interpretation is excessive control and restrictions lead to unrest and disorder. True freedom involves minimal interference and allowing natural order to prevail. You know, we can't really talk about freedom in the context of our lives without talking about government. And today, a lot of people look at government and say the government is there to help us. I beg to differ. I think the government shouldn't help people. I think the government is there to protect the conditions in which people can help themselves and each other. That should be the sole role of government, to protect the conditions in which we can help ourselves and each other. Now, that is much closer to freedom. For me, freedom means to take the highest form of responsibility for my actions, for my thoughts, for the consequences of my actions or inactions, and to quit blaming everyone else for what my life is, what my joy is or isn't. That is why we speak about things like healing, because unless we go through healing like we talked about yesterday, we will never be able to experience any kind of freedom. Because the first bondage is the bondage of the past, of our unhealed traumas and pains, which keeps us in a loop. So for the greatest bondage, we don't even need external sources. We are ourselves the source of our greatest bondage. And hence, we put ourselves in positions of more bondage in the outside world. People are willing over and over again, every election cycle, to be told the same story. If you don't like what you have, vote for somebody else. It never fundamentally improves. It never fundamentally changes anything, but the story remains the same. What nobody, especially those who want your voice, your vote, will ever tell you is, if you want to live a different life, maybe a life of freedom, first look in the mirror. There are the answers, and that's what triggers people greatly. If I say to people to their face, I am fully responsible for my own life, my actions, and the consequences, including the conditions that I live in, that they can hear that. But if I say, and so are you, oh boy, I get hatred. I get the death stare. But you don't understand my life. If you knew what I've been through, you wouldn't say that. Yes, of course. There's always that one exception to the eternal law. No, there isn't. Which is not to say that I don't emphasize or I don't feel and know the pain that people have been subjected to. But the truth remains the truth, that nobody else is responsible for setting them free from that. And that's the first freedom, right? That is the eternal truth. And then we go on the journey of truth in all aspects of life. If we want freedom, that is the path we must walk. So freedom is not a destination that can be achieved and accomplished in a moment. The choice for it can, but the choice is the first step on a step of on a path of 1,000 miles. Because every day when you dedicate your life to truth, you walk one step more in freedom, because truth does equal freedom. Now, it is up to you to either accept certain things, to live half-truths, to live lies because they're comfortable, or not. Nobody can take that away from you, because ultimately, you and I, we all have free will. We can say yes or no. And freedom is saying yes when you mean yes and no when you mean no, and never wavering, never stepping away from that. So I thought at one point, here's what freedom is. I don't need to carry a driver's license. I don't need license plates on my car. I'm a sovereign being. I'll go into every discussion with a cop that I possibly can. I'll let all the judges know. I'll let the government know that I don't participate. Well, that was all interesting. Writing those letters, having those conversations, all that was very interesting. We were pretty much on the list of every agency you could possibly imagine. But did we make a dent? Maybe a little. But it's when you step out of that confrontation, in which quickly I realized that cop, that guy in the uniform, it's interesting, from 8 to 5, he wears a uniform. He represents one thing. He represents authority in his view, in the view of most people. And he takes off the uniform and he's just the guy next to you at the grocery store. And all of a sudden, when you realize that, you talk to everyone like a fellow human being. And in some, you realize there's not much humanness there. But for the most part, you realize if I go into confrontation with this person, no one will be served. If I can have a meaningful conversation, well, then I've had clerks, judges, attorneys, police officers, heads of agencies that officially don't exist. And you can have a meaningful conversation with all of them because ultimately it concerns all of them. They just believe while they're in their title, in their position, that it doesn't, but it does. And either we walk towards freedom or we walk into greater and greater enslavement. There's only those two choices. So this is why we speak about what we speak about, and it's all ultimately aiming in one direction. But it's not platitudes. These are all greater concepts that can be understood and comprehended mentally, maybe in a few hours. But to live them, you have to dedicate your life to it. Freedom also means to do what you know to be right 100% of the time. Because if you don't, because of the fear of consequences, because of the fear of judgment, the fear of retaliation, then you automatically have signaled to yourself that you are in bondage. You're in bondage of that fear. So freedom is to live life in the most moral and ethical way that you're able to at that moment in time, and nothing less. That's why I said from the get-go, freedom is the most responsible way of life. It's something to be strived for, not something that anybody of us truly is yet. And I know now I make certain choices voluntarily. I make the choice to live in proximity to a society that requires of me to not always express myself fully freely. I have a natural thing, I'd love to, especially in summer, I'd love to just walk out the front door butt naked. Now, yeah, this would probably trigger comment. It's not because I'm a flasher, but because we've lived in places where there was no soul in sight. So it's not like I was disturbing anybody. And I was just like all the other beings in nature. Now, if I do it where we're now, it would probably cause some trouble. So I don't do it. So in that way, I restrict myself to a certain degree. Sure. It doesn't really bother me. And we all do that. The question is, are we aware of that we're doing it? Do we make conscious choices around it? Or is it all running subconsciously? So freedom to me is healing. Freedom to me is truth. And with that, freedom also equates love. Now, naturally, there are destructive expressions of freedom. But see, once my freedom or expression of freedom begins to harm you or endanger you or harm your property, then it's not freedom anymore. Then, then I'm becoming a tyrant. So it is a very respectful way of life. And I've actually written quite a few songs about that concept. And one that I released a little more than a couple weeks ago, a few weeks ago, it's called Time to Be Free. And we've been so busy with doing what we do and so inspired to do what we're doing here. Hold on, you don't have to look for it. I'm wearing it. So we've been so busy doing what we do that I haven't really talked about the song much, the concept much. But I will, because I love the song. I think uh, it's one that came through me. It's like, divine inspiration, if you will. And it's called Time to Be Free. And of course, what my wife did is she said, you know what? I love the title Time to Be Free because it really is time to be free. So let me tell you what she did. She sat down, created this t shirt, and she just said, do you want it subtle or bold? And I said, hell, as bold as possible, make it big. So this is the Time to Be Free t shirt. It's a limited edition, next 72 hours. If you want one, if you want to share your inspiration, share your desire to be free, links in the description. Thank you for your support. Also, the song links in the description. And well, actually, I don't think I set this up right to play it right now. So but you know what? We'll do it in the next couple of days. I'll play the song for you. Okay? You have my word. I need to set this up properly so it will sound good. Um, but here's what you can do. The link's in the description. You can go listen to the song now if you haven't heard it yet. It's on all platforms, of course, YouTube and everywhere. But none of this is just entertainment. I don't we don't want to just a shirt to me. If I go out into the world, when I feel like it, I put on one of the beautiful shirts that Christine has designed, some of the previous limited editions, like raise your standards, not your tolerance. Always a conversation starter. Um, make families great again. People love that shirt. Truth seeker. I have meaningful conversations. And when I wear this and when I will wear this, I know people will ask me, what does that mean, time to be free? And we can have meaningful conversations because that's what this is all about for us. Are we going to just throw out platitudes and pretend that, um, that it is enough to just wave a flag or enough to say God bless America and everybody knows what that means? No, if we ever knew what freedom was, we have forgotten it. And so we truly need to remind ourselves, each other. And I have always struggled a little bit with this next sentence that I'm going to share with you, but it is true. So, our co-founder of the Welcome to Freedom movement that we started all these years ago, he said to me, I was out of society. I was ready to live completely detached from everything. But here's what I realized. I can't be truly free until everyone is free. That's a tall order. And I still don't know all these years later if that's really entirely true. But it is our calling. And that's what I know. And our deepest inspiration to at least try, to at least do our very best to inspire as many people as possible to join this journey of freedom, it is truly individual, but it so greatly positively affects the collective. And I do see the deep wisdom of the Lakota traditions when they say the well-being of the collective, or the well-being of the individual cannot be more important than the well-being of the collective. It's hand in hand. And I can say this without being a Marxist, socialist, communist. I'm none of these things. But I do know that if I'm free and living wonderfully, beautifully, healthily ever after, and everyone else around me is miserable, that's not good enough for me. That won't work. So here we are doing what we do. every day. We thank you for doing it with us, for being with us, for your support, for your love, for your thoughts, for your dreams, for sharing, uh, for being open, vulnerable, and generous. So thank you all. We truly love you. And go check out, check out the t-shirts or ball caps or whatever. Check out the song if you feel like it. And we'll see you all very, very soon. We love you and we appreciate you. We'll see you very soon.